All set.
Okay, this is Chairman Mike McCoo calling to order the August 20th, 2020 meeting of the Board of Finance of the Town of Willington. Marissa, if you're ready, if you can make sure, have you already assessed who we have?
I have that we're missing Christina and Jeff and Mike Perry, but we have Mike McCoo, Pete Tanaka, Steph Summers, Matt Clark, and Lisa.
That is correct. And just know Erica as well, since she's an ex officio member.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Seating of alternates, Christina is going to be late. She requested that Lisa be seated in her place.
Do you need a motion?
Yes, go ahead.
So moved.
Can I get a second? I'll second that motion. Can we get a vote on seating Lisa for Christina?
Steph?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Pete?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. For minutes, any of you have checked your email in the last half an hour? Marissa sent out the email. There was an error on her end on getting the minutes out after last meeting because they were not filed properly with the town clerk. We only have them as a matter of review tonight. She will get them to the town clerk immediately, and then we will take official action at the next meeting.
Again, I'm really sorry about that, everybody.
So you all have the minutes. You can certainly bring up if you have any questions, but we can't take action on them tonight. So if there aren't any questions, we'll move on, but I'll give you a second. Okay. So let's move on to present to speak. As always, we'll do the same as we have been doing. We'll look for video. We'll check to see anyone who doesn't have a video feed. We'll make sure that people have time to get unmuted and speak up. As is noted on the agenda, participation is desired and encouraged. Speakers may be limited to time, appropriateness of comments to maintain progress, stay on topic, maintain decorum. If anyone has a video feed, which looks like might just be you, Peter, L, if you want to speak and present to speak, please wave your hand and we'll bring you in, and then we'll move on to the non-video. All right, Peter, I recognize you. There, that looks like you're in.
Oh, thank you. Good evening, all. Thank you for adding to the agenda, Mike, the school roofs.
Yes.
Expenditures, so I won't raise those issues during present to speak, but I'm glad to see that they are there and will be discussed. I will ask now during present to speak what the status of the MBR calculation is that I asked at the previous 3 meetings. And if we have a final determination there. And secondly, if the board has communicated with its resources to look at ways to restructure the fund balance to make it less susceptible to different liabilities that we may face. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll speak briefly first on the MBR. I have not made any moves since the last meeting on the MBR myself. The calculation and the information is much more better found in other people's hands. And because it wasn't going to affect what we've approved yet, we've approved a budget that the MBR calculation is good information, but it won't change what we approve for the budget. I hadn't put effort into that. I don't know if Phil's going to be joining us. I would be happy to ask him that question. If anyone else on the board, I know Matt, you had some interest in the MBR. So if someone else on the board has other information, I'd welcome that in response to Peter's question, and then we can go on to the other question. Okay, seeing as we have no comment on that, Peter, just refresh me again on your other question. I'm sorry, your second question.
Before we leave the first question, I would point out that the MBR will have a significant bearing on the forthcoming budget. So it is something that appears every year as a baseline for us, and I think important. But having said that, my second question was whether the board had an opportunity to reach out to its financial resources to see different ways the fund balance could be managed or structured to avoid liability in the future.
Okay, thank you for refreshing me on that. What I can say to that is that in the interim, I did get information from Donna. I inquired on what the accounting firm that works for the town, what is in their task, current approved task list, and what we are able to do with them. She did inform me that there's page 2, which she sent the agreement, forwarded to the board members, so that if we were to choose to use them in any capacity to discuss either the capital questions, which were brought up in the last meeting, or any of these other questions about the reserves, we do have the opportunity to engage them on new financial terms, but it is not included in the current task list. Since it's not something we're currently paying for, I did not make an effort to engage them without it coming back through the board. But I do agree that both of these issues, the MBR and this fund balance issue, are ongoing issues, and I intend to keep these conversations going on the board as we make progress with these. So they won't be put aside after tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, that's the only video screen I see for public present to speak. Mike, would you unmute the other participants we have? If there's anybody else on, go ahead, Mike.
I don't see anybody else participating via phone. So anybody who's logged in from a computer should be able to unmute themselves, but I'll hit the unmute all button. So anybody that wants to speak.
Okay. Is there anyone else who is joining us tonight who would like to speak during present to speak? And we'll have another present to speak at the end of the meeting as the agenda shows. Mike, now it looks like everyone's muted.
Yep, everybody should have gotten a request to unmute if they wanted to.
Understood. Okay. We'll presume that means there isn't any more present to speak now. Again, we'll come back to you towards the end of the meeting. Okay, old business. Public health crisis, update potential effect on municipal budgets. Surrounding this conversation is the information that we requested since the last meeting, which has been sent to all the board members. We have feedback from Erica from looking at the town operations, Board of Education. We have more information from Phil that I sent to you. That's where the significant dollar items are. We do have some smaller dollar items from the fire departments, a significant amount of salary expense for Willington 1 because they have paid people on duty, and that goes for both the COVID and the storm emergency. Extra salary in both of those areas. And we have a small amount, under $3,000, I believe, from the Willington Hill Fire Department. A lot of it is expenses related to hosting COVID positive or exposed EMTs in the house on the property at 25 Old Farms next to the church, and some costs for PPE. Many of these items have opportunities for reimbursement and many don't. So this is sort of the ongoing conversation. Erica, do I see you raising your hand?
Yeah, so some of those, not all, some are in addition to, you might see already indicated in the spreadsheet that I shared with you. So if those costs we are already aware of, then they're indicated there. There were additional costs outside of like current costs from Phil, I think he sent to you, but most of the ones from Willington Hill are included in our numbers because we already knew about those costs. I do have some additional items that may come up, and this came up since I sent you that information. As you know, we have a large voter event coming up in November. I don't know if any of you know, there's a presidential election
Yeah,
happening.
just so you know, Erica, I did forward that this afternoon, but that was fairly late.
No, I have something different than what the registrars
Okay.
may have
So there's
shared with
even
you.
more.
So the registrars have a part in the election, and the town clerk's office has a part in the election. The town clerk's office, unlike the primary, the plan currently, and this certainly could change, is for the Secretary of State's office to mail out applications for absentee ballots to registered voters. And then they would send those, similar to the primary, they would send those back into the town clerk's office. The town clerk then would be responsible for sending the ballot. For the primary, the ballots were sent through the Secretary of State's office using a clearinghouse. The plan currently for November is for your town clerk's office to send those. That could cost us upwards of about $1,200 if the postage stays the same as it was in the primary election. But today I was shared, this morning we were shared information that the Secretary of State's office is planning to send funds to each municipality to cover the cost of postage as well as additional staffing that may be needed. And in the coming days, they should be giving us that information. I don't know what that is, we'll share that. So there may be potential extra costs specifically because of the election that we could relate to because of COVID concerns. But now the Secretary of State's office is saying they're going to be sending money, not knowing what that money is and if it'll cover all of our costs. So that could be an additional, maybe $2,000-$3,000 to the town of Willington.
And that's for what? What would that cover? Would that cover the extra
The postage?
town clerk?
It would be the postage, and if we needed additional staffing in the town clerk's office to help with the onslaught of absentee ballots. So for the primary, it was only registered, because we have a closed primary, it was only registered Democrats and registered Republicans, and the ballots were actually sent. The applications came in here, they were processed, put in a spreadsheet and shared, and then they were sent from a clearinghouse. The plan now is applications sent from Secretary of State, everything comes here, and then we would send out the ballots. And then they're either mailed back or they're sent or they're dropped in the secure ballot drop box out front.
Okay. Board member, more discussion, questions on the information we have. I realize a lot of it is late coming in. We probably need a little time to digest it. The information is also still evolving, particularly in the area of reimbursements. Erica, if you have a moment, or if Chief Moore, either one of you are willing to contribute what you anticipate that we think will be reimbursed, like from FEMA and things like that. And that could affect both the storm and the coronavirus.
I'll speak to the coronavirus reimbursements, and I don't, Donna can weigh in on whether or not she sent ours in yet. What we're finding from most towns reporting is that almost nothing they expected to be covered from FEMA is covered. Almost none of what they were basic things, putting up plexiglass, dividers, and whether it be overtime, additional EMS work, things aren't being covered. So then they're being submitted to the Connecticut, the state program that federal money came through. So my guess is, even though FEMA was an option, they're saying it feels like we sent money to the state, use that state money, even though the state had to stand up those funds for particular items. So not much for coronavirus seems to be being covered on a broad level. And the state had said to us, based on the original projections that we all had to send in, they could cover 100% of those costs. Certainly we have new costs coming in, and there are different avenues for funding for schools. than municipalities.
So to summarize that, should we be thinking that you're still optimistic that a large portion of this will get covered?
Yes, I just think we're gonna have to go through the exercise of sending to FEMA and just prolonging being reimbursed from the state, which is a frustrating process at best. But FEMA didn't stand up this program like they typically do. So discouraging. Typically in a FEMA cases, they give you very specific information on what's covered. And even when they went over this with us before coronavirus, they were things that you would expect out of a more natural disaster storm, where you're talking about property damage and cleanup from that. And so no one knew where things would stand. And a lot of people have costs around IT and devices to send folks to work from home and modifying buildings on a small scale, not even large scale. And they just aren't seeming to be covered. And as those were coming back on the state calls that I have now bi-weekly, folks, CEOs were shocked at the fact that nothing was being covered and it was all having to go back to the state. So I just think it's an exercise in futility, but we have to send to FEMA first and have to have it rejected by FEMA in order to get funding from the state.
Okay, great. Thank you on that.
Welcome.
I'm going to come back to you about unemployment in just a minute, but I just wanted to see
Sure.
if Moore had anything else he wanted to add on what were the reimbursements, the storm, things like that.
No, ours still go through the town, so everything was filed together. So our hope is that the reimbursement will be done through OPM, but we're not 100% sure. As far as the storm, we're told as of right now, 75%.
Okay.
And for coronavirus, it was 75% as well. And
Correct.
so the hope was that the state could then just stand up the remaining 25%, but it's not looking like that.
Okay, thank you for that. And Erica, can you then contribute the latest information? I had intended to check unemployment numbers before we signed on tonight, but I ran out of time.
You know, I'll look right now. Earlier this afternoon, they did not have July unemployment numbers. I would hope by the 20th of August we could have them. Let me just,
Yeah, that's what I intended to check. 'Cause last time I checked.
yeah, I'm gonna pop it up. No, we still have June numbers, which had us at a slight increase to 7.5%, which represented 274. So again, I would have hoped by now the July numbers would be out. So I don't really have anything to report.
Yeah. Matt.
Yeah, I looked. There's a different spot on the DOL website that has. I know what you're saying. The June numbers were 274 Willington residents were unemployed, but there's another spot we can look at. I looked, and it was about 230 or 237. So unemployment has gone down in Willington. However, a lot of those people have cut, decreased hours and things like that. So it's still a difficult time.
Okay. Thank you for that, Matt. Also, Matt, you had sent some information to the group, and I'm trying to move through my screens here and get back to that one. Do you want to quickly highlight that? Because that was about forecasts and stuff.
Yeah, I actually didn't bring it up on my screen. Sorry, I'm not prepared. So this was from, I believe, the Office of Policy and Management. The financial person there was indicating that she's asking for budgets that are no increases, no inflationary adjustments, except where mandated by law. And also that they're looking at a $3 billion deficit next year and another $3 billion deficit the year after that at the state level. And therefore, she's asking for different departments to decrease spending. And I think she was talking about aid to towns and cities, and also Medicaid or Husky. This was reported in the Connecticut Mirror.
Okay, and I did try to download the attachment. It won't, something's blocking it for security, so I can't open it right now.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just was going to say I was going to try to get some detail off of that, but yes, I have heard the same thing. We've heard news clearly that our budget, and unfortunately, as is typical yearly, coming from Hartford, in the course of a week, you can hear that there's a deficit, and then you can hear there's a surplus, which doesn't help us, particularly in tough times like this, to be caught in between different people's interpretations. But I would say if there's any side I would guess we're going to fall on this year is a deficit.
Well, Mike, could I jump in? Because
Yes.
that same story that Matt sent out from the Mirror says that they're projected to be 2.5 billion in the red this year with the fiscal year beginning July 1st. But they're expected to exceed 2.8 billion in the reserves once the audit is completed in September. So they think they're going to be in excess of that.
Okay.
But he's absolutely right that they're saying the next 2 fiscal years from 2021 to 2023, they're expecting 3 billion a year in deficit.
Which I think for our local purposes, we should be certainly interpreting as a risk for our revenue stream from the state.
I think we also need to keep in mind if the latest coronavirus relief fund comes to fruition and is signed, it includes $400 in unemployment and 25% of that back to the state, how they plan to come up with those dollars and what takes the hit, because that would be in this budget. And so is there something else that would get cut?
Yes, fair point. Any more contributions from board members to the discussion about the potential effect on our budget?
I did want to ask a couple things. One was on the unemployment claims. Eric, on your numbers, is that for the schools or for the town?
That was for the town of Willington.
So about 15,000 in through September 1st.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're talking about in my spreadsheet. I'm sorry. I was talking about unemployment numbers. I will defer to Donna on that. I would assume that's everybody because this list was encompassing town and schools. So my understanding is it's including schools as well. Is that correct, Donna?
Erica, I didn't receive the spreadsheet, so I don't see what you see, but I believe the spreadsheet is town and school.
Okay.
I believe it's district-wide.
Shared with us.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, it's labeled towns and schools, and that's how we've been tracking things, Stephanie. So I would assume it was both.
Thank you.
You're
That
welcome.
was the main one I wanted to know.
Yeah, there was minimal unemployment. There were folks who had worked for us in lesser capacities, and we attempted to argue some of those, and that didn't come to fruition, so we were responsible for.
I guess the question I would have, since altogether the numbers are, and everything is added together, I know, so this is like to September 1, but the growth is over budget is between 56,000 and 68,000 is the through September 1. So I was just wondering if that's like 2 months in the fiscal year. Is that expected to keep a pace? And if so,
No.
Okay.
In the unemployment, I think there are benefits, but overall, no, most of those costs were one-time costs that came early. The retrofitting we did here on the town hall and shoring up offices, or purchasing IT to send people to work from home. We needed a VPN for that. I know the fire department had quite a bit of overtime early on when they had individuals who tested positive and then had to be quarantined. There was funds for that. So I don't, unless we see another uptick, they might not see that, but a lot of the expenses we had in the town were one-time expenses.
Okay.
Knock on wood.
Is there a reason why, I don't want you to, get into the area where you're compromising anyone's privacy, but was there a reason why we needed both the facility that Willington Hill offered for quarantining and the trailer at Willington 1?
So I'll let Chief Moore speak to that. Those were items from the fire department.
I'm sorry, Stephanie, can you repeat?
Yeah, I just wondered if there's a reason why we needed both the Willington Hill facility for quarantining and to rent a trailer for Willington 1.
Because of the times, when people tested positive, we had to separate them. They couldn't be together. So we had one person in the house and one person in the trailer.
Gotcha.
If we had put them together, it would have extended the person in the house's time.
We don't want to do that.
Definitely
That
not.
means more OT, right?
Correct, we do not.
Trust me, none of them wanted to be in the house, and nobody wanted to be in the trailer.
I can guarantee you none of us wanted to be in that trailer.
It looked like a nice trailer.
It was for the first 2 days.
Thank you.
Okay, more board discussion on the effect on the municipal budget. And this agenda item is really more on the public health crisis, but since the storm has kind of come in, and a lot of those expenses, not that they're technically mixed together, we can separate them, but they run in a lot of the same lines. So,
Yeah. Our storm expenses were overtime, really, on our end. You know, I don't have those numbers set aside for you just yet, but most of it came in the way of overtime hours and
Matt,
tree cutting. So
sorry.
right now it's out of budget, but yeah, our tree cutting budget is probably going to be maxed out at this point.
Is this the appropriate time to bring up impact on revenue, or are we seeing any changes in our revenue?
Oh, I can talk to you about tax revenue.
yes, please.
We seem to be right on target. Let me grab that. I talked about it at the Board of Selectmen meeting on Monday. So the Tuesday. So these numbers were as of Tuesday. We had brought in 6,531,000, roughly 6,531,000 and change. And so the tax collector reports that is about average for collection at this point in the collection cycle, which is surprising to all of us. We had quite a few people that were paying in full. That represents 47% of total real estate collected, not just the first installment, but total. 56% of personal property taxes and 60% of motor vehicle taxes. And just for some comparison, the totals for the first installment, which included all of the motor vehicle and the first installment of real estate and personal property, the total is 7,367,000 rounded. So we're only about 800,000 under that first installment amount, which is typical for this time of year. So it was good to report. We saw lots of collection, lots of folks making appointments to come in and pay, and people wanting to go ahead and pay in full. We heard a lot of people who were able to use their stimulus money and were able to save it and utilize for that. So I think we all thought we'd be in a much tougher position revenue-wise, but as far as tax revenue, we're right on target.
So we're roughly 80, like low 80s in percent of collection right now, 83 or something like that.
Roughly, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's
I apologize. I have it broken down by each individual.
No,
in the
that's
report,
fine.
But you know, it's really, and there were big changes between August, when what would have been the deadline, the beginning of August, and this week's report. So people are still continuously coming in, and the mailbox is continuously full of payments. So, and folks have until October 1st before the penalty kicks in, and it will revert back to July 1. So if people don't pay by October 1st, the penalty, the interest will go back to July 1. So people are taking advantage of holding off and paying if they can, but the majority of people are paying. And we saw a lot of full payments, so first and second installment of real estate payments.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Yeah, so is there any indication, maybe this is inappropriate, I don't know. If it is, people with more experience can tell me that we can't really talk about that. But is there any indication that the commercial properties, a lot of the apartment complexes are all but empty? I'm curious if on those, are we seeing the normal tax payments from those kinds of places, or are they holding off?
First of all, they're not empty anymore. They're completely.
A lot of them are full.
The students are back, and because the university cut the dorm capacity to about 40-some%, a little under 50%, anything that was available in the area got sucked up last minute. I know people who realtors approached them and said, "Hey, do you want to sell your condo? I can sell it today." And people have literally, at the drop of a hat, sold their condo in one day because parents who had money said, "I'll just buy a condo since I can't get housing for my kid."
I will tell you that
Apartments are pretty much full now.
yeah, there was the ability for those commercial properties to file for a deferral in a separate manner than other property. And she did have a couple of applications, and I'm not sure what the deferment was on those, so I can double check with Janice. Based on our numbers and the level of where we're at, my guess is it's not really affecting us that much. But that we did have a couple of applications. I don't know that they were all accepted for various reasons.
Matt, you live in the area of some of those apartments. I'm assuming I'm seeing a lot more traffic in the neighborhood. You're not seeing it across the street yet?
No, I have a lot of empty apartments.
Okay.
So, I didn't see that. I'm not seeing the same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
then maybe it's today. I don't know.
We did hear a couple of weeks ago that some of them were still empty, but typically their leases begin August 1st. It doesn't mean, folks may be waiting to move in until closer to classes starting, especially if they're just online. There's not really much reason for them to be here. But through the assessor's office, there had been some word on some of them not being as full, but then UConn decreased their already decreased number of housing opportunities. So that could give us more off campus than were expected a month ago. They made that change pretty late. And now we're seeing some students removed from on-campus housing because of their lack of social distancing activities. We could see an uptick in available apartments through that too. So
Not
during
that
the
we
storm,
want
I was
them
out at one of the
to-
apartments and there were a ton of students around, a ton. So,
Stephanie, go ahead.
I just said, not that we want them to move to town and steepen our curve.
Yeah. Okay, anything else from the board on item 1, public health crisis update? Okay.
Hey, Mike, I'm
yes.
sorry.
Go ahead,
I'm not
Peter.
sure this is the point, but we already went over it as on the registrar's budget.
Go ahead.
I did work at the primary, and I noted that the mail-in balloting was the request and clearinghouse mail out by the Secretary of State was to say the best FUBARD. A lot of people that requested ballots did not get them, so that there was some problems there. I'm not sure the balloting by mail is going to scale up the way the state hopes that it will. So I really think that registrars are going to need help with the mail-in balloting at the general election. Also, the move to the Hall School is going to be a cost issue, if not a logistics issue.
Yes, there will definitely be extra help needed. As you saw in the email, I forwarded it for the board members who have had the opportunity to see it this afternoon. The email that I sent you from Suzanne does discuss that, and I think we can all see that it's going to be necessary to have extra staffing. Matt, go ahead.
Nothing. Go ahead.
Okay, Stephanie.
I have some intel on that too, because I did the AP polls for Tallinn, and same thing that Peter does for our town. And they had 3 times the number of absentee ballots that they had in the last presidential. So it was 3/4 of the vote. their total vote was like 1776 and their absentees were 1226, something like that.
I believe it was similar in Willington. I don't have the numbers with me right now. I put them someplace else. But the amount of time that we had clerks just spend, the amount of time that clerks spent counting and ensuring that a truthful vote on the mail-ins. We had 2 clerks working on it for the whole time I was there. I didn't get there till 1 o'clock. It was, it's going to be an issue.
It is, and that's why you heard me talk about some additional staffing needed in the town clerk side, because it's going to start with being able to get them out, make sure they get into hands properly. And then when they come back into the town clerk's office before they're handed over to the registrar's office on the day of the election. So there is going to be a need for extra staffing on both sides. Only SOTS is telling town clerks that they're going to send money to the municipalities for that. I don't know if they're planning to take similar action for registrars.
Okay. All right, I don't think we have any other questions on this. Let's move to capital funding process. I think this needs to be a continued discussion. We are waiting. I did discuss with Stuart again, getting the next meeting started. So there's really, in my mind, there are 2 things that we've been talking about here. One is dealing with the capital plan itself. The other is dealing with all of this sort of process and definitions around the capital process. Stuart is working with Donna on when her materials are ready and her updates are ready. Some of that is being governed by the finishing up the training on the new software, making transitions. But the last I heard from Stuart when I talked to him last week was that the end of this month, he hopes to be ready to start calling capital meetings. And so this conversation needs to go on, and I'll keep it on the agenda. If anyone wants to contribute something now, that's great. But we also have the, what we talked about earlier about the potential of adding tasks and fees with the auditing firm if we choose to move in that direction to get advice on that. So I'm leaving that open for discussion at the moment, or encouraging discussion.
To get advice on capital funding?
Yes, you know, anything, we've discussed anything from getting definitions of capital, like there's always debate, and in my other jobs working for other organizations, there's debate about how you define what is a maintenance item versus what is a capital asset and things like that, and different people interpret it different ways. And as we've discussed before, some years the school has been told, you know, things that you wear out like carpeting shouldn't be in the capital plan. Then other times they said it should be in the capital plan, so it's not in your regular budget. Same things happen with fire departments. So, you know, as Peter L. told us in the last meeting, there's a lot of definition in the capital plan. There's a lot specified out that should answer this. The problem is that the amount that it's followed or not followed varies by committee, varies by chairman. So the conversation in my mind has been around, let's go back over this again, let's redefine these things, let's try to clean it up, and then let's try to actually follow the plan.
I think that's great, but I guess my view of this as an overall issue that might take a lot of our time right now, I just feel like we've got a whole lot of other things that are rising up in importance above this. I mean, what we're talking about is a process review and just debate about how we should do this going forward. We already have a CIP plan that's not complete that we've got to catch up with. That's going to be pretty time consuming for CIP. And then we have the school reopening and potential reclosing after that at some point. I just feel like I would like to focus on some of the matters at hand that we're going to be juggling quite feverishly, I think, versus that.
I see your point, but I think some of this will just naturally be part of the conversation when CIP has to discuss how we affect this current fiscal year and how we rebuild the next 4 years, which, as we all know, we don't have the next 4 years, which we're supposed to have. I think a lot of this conversation is going to just weave right into that, because that process and how we do our process are almost all the same question. If we had been religious about following the rules that are in the current capital plan, then I agree with you. Let's just use those rules and move forward. But we're not following the rules. And we also are in this situation where we didn't use the normal approval process, and we don't have the other 4 years of the plan. So I agree with you that it would be ideal to do process improvement in a quiet year, if there's such a thing. So maybe we don't do all the process improvement, but I think we're going to have to, have it as part of the conversation, and particularly because of the item that came up before about negotiating contracts. If the town being fiscally prudent and maintaining a larger fund balance is making it difficult to negotiate, say, the teachers' contracts or whatever, because they know we have this certain amount of money in a balance, then maybe that's part of this conversation too. Maybe restructuring and taking some of that fund balance that we know is going to capital anyway, maybe it should be in some sort of a capital fund. Maybe it's a matter of terminology that will help with that. So that's where I see that we can't really completely separate these issues.
I do understand that, Mike. I'm just thinking in terms of being midway and well, you know, now we're at the start of a fiscal year budget, but it's gonna, it could have major impact on the operating budget. So I'm thinking, you know, that's the part that I'm thinking would be tricky this year, is trying to figure that out. But
I agree. I think we have to keep an eye on that.
Saying, you know.
Yeah, we have to keep an eye on that. You're right. Matt?
Yeah, I think the reason I wanted to talk, I think that we need to have a commonality about how we treat these expenses, so that when we talk about capital expenditures and operating expenditures and maintenance and repair operations and things like that, you know, that things that are, you know, maintenance, painting isn't in the CIP budget. It just makes sense to me. The larger issue to me, other than that, the larger issue to me is how do we structure our town finances so that we don't have a huge pot of money that will be looked at by our teachers union and when it comes time to do contracts, and they'll just turn around and say, well, of course you have money. Look at you have $2 or $3 million that you have saved, and it's sitting there ready to be. So, I mean, if we go into arbitration, that's the arbitrator is going to look at it and go, okay, there's no problem here with ability to pay. So where's the problem? And I think I'd like to get advice from an accounting firm on how do we structure this in what accounts, such that you know, that's clearly set aside for capital and not you know, operating expenses, if you will.
Well, in the last CIP process.
Hang on a second, Steph. Matt, please don't think this comment is snarky at all, but you just repeated everything I said. So I just wanted to make sure you heard me say that before. So I assume you're saying you're in agreement, because that's all the stuff I just said. And again, I'm not being snarky about it. I just want to make sure that if I'm not saying things clearly or whatever, I think you repeated everything I just said.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So
okay, all right. So you're just saying you're in agreement with that.
Right.
Okay, all right, thank you. Go ahead, Steph.
Oh, just that we've talked in the last CIP process, or the last couple of years, I think, about increasing the pool for capital, that basically we're getting down to only being able to handle our lease commitments and not do much else. So that may work hand in glove with what you're both talking about in terms of looking at everything. I'm just saying we don't have maintenance built into our regular operating now. So we're gonna have to fix that too if we're gonna clean this up.
That I think is what's important, and you're right, it may not be able to do it all this year, but that's what's important about this. If we need to be clear about these definitions and then enforce them, that's going to be a process, because we can't just take them out this year and leave people with no way to pay for them, or there may be no money depending on how things go. I mean, you know, we've been trying to figure out how to counter the cost of the corona. Who knew we were going to end up with this tropical storm thing? Fortunately, that huge. But 2020 still has a lot of months left to see what else it can throw at us. So, okay. Monitoring current fiscal year budget. I sent out the report that Donna produced, and in a second here, I'm going to bring it up on my screen so I can actually I have to go back and forth between the different. I keep picking up the wrong mouse for the wrong computer here. My apologies. Okay, I've got my copy up on the screen, on my screen. So looking at the bottom line, at the bottom of page 5 for those who have it, and I'll read it off for those who don't have it in front of them. Right now we're showing 26% of budget spent. And if you look at where we are in the months of the year, so we're just over a quarter of the budget spent. We're not, calendar-wise, we're not a quarter of the way through the year, but some of those are front-loaded expenses. Like, for example, I'm assuming typically for the fire department, and I'll look up and find the list, the line item, but typically for the fire department, they pay the whole $22,000 insurance bill at the beginning of the fiscal year. So that particular budget line goes to 100% right at the beginning of the year. I'm assuming that's some other stuff. Erica, if you have anything you want to throw in on that, you know.
I might defer to Donna, and Donna, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of those things, and I don't know the report you're seeing, Mike, because I'm not seeing it. It could be there's certain grants. So the fire department, the library, human services, all of that money comes out of the budget that we see and is deposited to their accounts. So you might see those large sums in total, although they haven't spent the funds from the fire department yet. They're out of the government budget because that payment has already been made. They get a lump sum payment. Is that correct, Donna?
So let me just, Erica, this budget I think is different. Donna can confirm, but the report, which you unfortunately don't have in front of you, is not showing that, but it is showing encumbrances, for example, salaries throughout the rest of the year. Donna?
I know they're encumbrances, but I'm just not sure how like I said, the report you're looking at.
Yeah,
Right.
so the fund transfers have not been booked yet, but there are some things, Mike, you are correct. Insurance premiums, the premium is paid in full at the beginning of the year. Workers' comp, liability is an example of that. And the heating oil, we are on a prepay cycle. So 70% of our contracted quantity is paid in July. So you'll see large payments in the heating oil line items because of the prepay. Actually, this year, you're going to see that in miscellaneous. And then as the bills come in, as the deliveries are made and the tickets come in, you know, then we're going to post it to the actual line item where the delivery was made. So that's why you see those big expenditures in some line items.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the good news is that if you were looking at a typical year, right now, we're early in this budget year, but this goal, I think we've all felt is important and also came to us from present to speak comments from previous meetings. So I think it's good that we get used to the process, even though we're very early in the fiscal year. Right now, we're not seeing anything alarming, which is great, but we should get used to this report and watching as we get further into this fiscal year for something that comes out of left field at us. Any more questions on that?
I don't have a question on that, but I did have a question about, do we have an idea of how much, I mean, if we go under an assumption that nothing happens with our reimbursement from the state, our budget's going to be okay. What happens, do we have some kind of an estimate of what happens if they actually do cut 10%? Because that's what that article said. How much, I mean, I don't know, I don't even know which lines to total up. I would do it myself, but which lines do we total up to figure out what the base would be for our 10% reduction?
It would be a 10% reduction in revenue, and it would be in next fiscal year's budget. So it wouldn't be in this fiscal year.
Right.
They're looking forward.
Okay.
Yeah, we would have to, and as we get into the budget process over this winter, that's when we always are bringing up throughout the winter and into the spring in the budget process. We're continually poking at people like Donna and the treasurer and stuff, and Erica saying, what are you hearing from Hartford? What are you hearing from Hartford? Because we're trying to anticipate, do a revenue projection into the new fiscal year. And that will be particularly critical this year, because if for some reason it is looking dire into the next fiscal year, how we close this current fiscal year may be valuable too.
Thanks.
She says in this story, just to refresh everybody's memory, McCaw, she's the OPM director. She says she's requesting responsible proposals for restructuring and reducing municipal aid and Medicaid funded programs, two areas lawmakers traditionally are reluctant to cut, though she did not target a cut of 10% or any other specific level. So.
Okay. Thank you for that, Stephanie. Okay, annual report. We still have pieces missing from the previous year, and it's time to be doing the one for the next year. So I'm going to spend some time communicating directly with a couple of the people involved and see if we can somehow get an annual report from them. We're way past the time of year when we're supposed to be producing the annual report. Should be working on the new annual report right now for the fiscal year that just ended. So I will directly pursue those people. If we can't get it, we will issue the annual report with those areas. We'll issue it with those areas missing. And I'll talk with Erica and the town clerk some more and make sure that we meet whatever legal obligations there are, because there are specific things that direct an annual report. And I want to make sure we try to follow those, even though we're well behind the 8 ball. Capital, I think we've discussed all of that, unless anyone has anything else to introduce. So
The only thing I would say is a real tiny thing, and that is if we could maybe message Stu in some way to go ahead and look at the calendars for September dates, because otherwise, I know how this works. We won't pick anything till October. Then we're in the, it just gets pushed off and pushed off.
Hey, I know a lot of what he's waiting on is Donna, who certainly has more than a full plate currently, and the storm didn't help as we were in the midst of training the rest of the staff here on how to use the software. So while we definitely need to reach out with Stuart, I mean, I talked to Donna. Is late September a good time, Donna? Do you think you'll be ready by then and we can just book something?
Yes, I think that would be a good plan.
Okay.
Thanks, Donna.
So I'll reach out to Stuart and see if we can't just get a date on the books. And then, we can feel confident that Donna will be ready, and that'll give her a little bit of extra time. I'm pretty sure that's what he's been waiting for. They've been communicating with each other. But, I appreciate you all being patient as our, small staff is taking on a large undertaking with no in-person training on this finance software. It's making it more difficult.
thank you, Erica.
Welcome.
Okay, schools. Roof project and the septic. Let's do septic first because I think that's easy. Erica, do you know, I believe the septic work is complete, right?
It's done and it was in their budget, so it does not affect the Board of Finance or any funding. They were able to do it out of their fiscal year budget last year, so that's
Excellent.
done.
That's what I thought. We can put that one behind us. So to the roof. For anyone who read Mr. Stevens, Superintendent Stevens' letter, and I've had lengthy discussions with him in the interim since our last meeting. They are working well over their normal full work days on attempting to meet all the state's requirements, the communicating with the townspeople, the Board of Ed, on getting school reestablished in coronavirus. He simply cannot put the time into the roof project right now. He and I discussed an option, which he did talk about in his letter and his communication that the board members have, and that is to turn over the management of it to another party. Some towns have a facilities manager. We don't have that option in Willington. And some towns will use a consulting firm. There's one that very commonly does schools around here, and the name's escaping me right now, but it's a consulting firm that does a lot of the school stuff, and they do the roofs. They would do essentially the entire process. I asked him to give me a non-committal thumbnail guess sketch of what that would cost, and he thinks it would probably be $20,000 to $30,000 to bring in a consultant to take over the management of the contract, and that would be, they would just take it on and they would manage it. They would PM it from the town's point of view as far as watching the work to make sure it gets done right. All the stuff that he normally would do, and they would file the paperwork, the reimbursements, all that stuff. So that's where we are. We either hang on a little longer and see if he can get to it during the winter. He told me that if we can manage coronavirus reasonably through the winter, he'll have plenty of time to get back to it and have a spring roofing project. But if things fall apart, then that could possibly cause a delay. So really it's a matter at this point of saying, do we want to hold on a little longer, or do we want to start talking about putting some funds into bringing on a consultant to take over and push the project forward? My feeling is we can wait one more month to September, but I'm looking for discussion.
I thought you said it was, I'm confused. I thought it was next spring.
I just to get the process, to make a decision on whether we might have to put funds into hiring a consultant. I think we can wait one more month and see how his kickoff into school goes and stuff like that. I'm sorry, I should have explained it better.
All right.
Still be looking to do a springtime project, but we would have to make the moves in the meantime, making a budget change or finding the money and engaging a consulting firm to do it. So we'd need time before spring to do that.
So I'm not familiar as familiar as everyone else is, but I heard from the PTA director that the roofs are leaking. Are the roofs leaking?
I don't have that information. I mean, we did patching on both the schools. I assumed that was adequate, but it was $17,000 worth of work to patch $1 million roof job. So I'm assuming there's risk there. Maybe another area started leaking that wasn't in the patches. I don't know. I hadn't heard anything. The last thing Phil said at a meeting was, we have patched roofs that aren't leaking. So maybe this is new information.
He hasn't mentioned anything in our discussions about it.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's not, but we haven't heard anything from his perspective.
If you have a source, Matt, feel free to check back.
I'll go down to Willington Pizza 2 and ask the waitress, and she's the head of the PTA. So
I would maybe shoot an email to the superintendent. That's probably the best source to go with.
Okay.
I mean,
Anything else?
I did have a question, Mike.
Go ahead.
If we did decide to go with, I mean, I don't know that if the patch job is holding, I don't know. I think that maybe buys us some time. But one of my questions is there a time frame that we have to do this work in to get full state reimbursement, or as full as possible? And B, does the state reimburse for a consultant cost?
I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer to either of those. Typically, project management is a project cost, but I'm not sure if it needs to be structured a certain way to make sure that happens. You know, it could be as simple as some wording being right or wrong, which would include or exclude that expense. Not my area of expertise at all.
Phil might know the answer or be able to
Right.
help us with that.
Erica, were you raising your hand or just adjusting your glasses?
Just adjusting my glasses.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Okay. Okay, anything else in old business before I move to new? Okay, let's talk about transfers. Hang on, now I have to get the right, I have to change documents here. Let's see.
Alex had to log off, so if you need anything else, let me know. He can try to get back on as he's working.
Okay. Okay, so I have the transfer list in front of me. Donna, are you able to just give us a quick overview of what's happening here?
Yes, I can. So there are 3 departments in the budget, old year 1920, that are overspent, and we cannot close the books with departments in a negative situation because there is a statute that says a department may not exceed their appropriation, and another statute that says the Board of Finance may transfer unexpended balances to correct that. So that is the purpose of this transfer request. And the 3 lines that went over are 1, miscellaneous, and that went over $1,559 because we started booking COVID-related expenses to miscellaneous. And that was mostly virtual meeting expenditures. The second line item that went over is the transfer station, and we talked about that the last time we did transfers, and when everything was finalized, we still need another $9,641 to cover the shortfall in the transfer station. And the third department is the revenue collector. That's $831 over. There was some employee turnover after the budget was set, and it resulted in a salary shortfall. So I'm proposing to cover the shortfall from the first one, miscellaneous. I am proposing to cover that from town office operations. There's budget savings in the computer expense line item. The transfer station, I'm proposing to cover that shortfall with the public works. There's some budget savings there. And the revenue collector salary, there's actually salary savings in the planning and zoning assistant line because there is a new employee, and that resulted in a salary savings.
Okay, one question, Donna.
Yes.
The answer, but I'm just verifying.
Yes.
The sources of
Yes.
the froms that
Yes.
you talked about, those are all from the same fiscal year, correct? So we're not
Yes.
FY budget.
Yes.
I thought that was true, but I just wanted to confirm. So we're moving some, essentially a little bit of surplus from some lines in the closing budget into some shortfalls in the other lines in the closing budget.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, for discussion purposes, I will start the motions. I move that we transfer $1,559 from line item 0181 town office operations to line item 0871 miscellaneous. Can I get a second? Thank you, Lisa. For a second. Any discussion? Marissa, can you call a roll call, please?
Steph,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
Pete,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Mike.
Aye. Okay, motion passes. So I move that we transfer $9,641 from line item 0311 Public Works to line item 0351 Transfer Station.
I second.
Discussion? All right, let's call a vote.
Matt,
Aye.
Pete,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Steph,
Aye.
Mike.
Aye.
Okay.
Motion passes. All right, I make a motion that we move $831 from line item 0171, planning and zoning, to line item 0137, revenue collector.
I second.
Any discussion? Call a vote, please.
Pete,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Matt,
Yes.
Steph,
Aye.
Mike.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Next item in new business, storm effects on budgets. We kind of talked, oh, Erica, go ahead.
Backtrack, while we were talking, I reached out to Phil. He says his roofs are not leaking.
Okay.
There's
All
your,
right. Maybe the roof is leaking at Willington Pizza too.
But I'm really glad that Matt's getting out for some pizza.
well, I mean, schools have been closed since March, so I'm not sure who else is in the building. If, Phil doesn't know, that's.
Well, probably they've been in there the last month anyway. So,
Well, teachers have. So,
all right.
Sure.
So storm effects on budgets. We've talked about this a lot already during the old business. We did, as I said at the beginning, we did have communications from both fire departments, from election officials, from Erica and Phil. And some of that was storm related, some of that was COVID-19. So just, make sure as you read those items, you're picking up on the differences. The fire departments had some effect. Willington won on salary for extra staffing during the storm. Willington Hill, I think, had minimal effect from the storm because they don't have any salary expenses. And as Erica noted already, Public Works tree budget, and there's still a lot left to do. I know any of us, if you're weird like me, you're driving around town looking at all the broken stuff that's up in the trees over the roads, and those are a risk to our budget and a risk to the safety of our people. So certainly, I'm assuming we're going to be having some conversations during this current fiscal year about what we're going to need to do to resolve this. And we probably don't know all the damage yet. I'm hearing in towns all around, and it's already happened in Willington, that a tree that apparently was almost completely broken in the storm has broken the rest of the way and now fallen. We've had trees and wires down in the last few days in Willington and other towns because of stuff that's weak and finally gives out. So,
and what we did find is these are trees that appeared to be otherwise healthy and off town property and onto, outside of our jurisdiction to be taken down. And that's what people saw. There were, I think the program, look, if I'm going to say anything positive about Eversource, this is the only thing you're going to hear me say positive right now, is that their tree trimming program, seemed to have done some good, but it allowed lots of space for those trees, then new trees to fall over into property. So that was my question, is should we have been looking at more tree trimming on our own and really increasing those budgets? I know Troy's concern is his tree budget being really practically maxed out because of this storm. I think you heard, most of you were on CIP, heard him asking for a bucket truck. If we had a bucket truck, in a lot of these instances, we wouldn't have to pay Linden to come in and do it. And so there's an added expense there. But that comes with the nature of living on the coast and this close to the water, and it's only middle August, so I'm not sure that we're done seeing storm damage. So we may be talking about this for a little bit longer if the season turns out the way they predict it. But our expenses are really Public Works related for the most part.
Erica, how about Emergency Operations Center expenses? I know obviously I participated a couple of days in the Emergency Operations Center. Certainly there was, there was some feeding of staffing and things like that. Although I noticed there were some donations for that too.
The majority of it, so some of it, I believe, came from donations, whether it be the fire department paid for some, and then donations. It takes a village hill, really. I see Sarah's on this call. I was remiss in thanking her during the selectmen's meeting. When she asked what we could do. Not only did she help at our charging station and water station, but brought some food in that helped feed our crew that was working overtime out there, Public Works crew and our EMS staff. So we're thankful for her program and those donations. They made a difference, fueling them up so they could go back out, cut some trees, and make things safe.
Right. And I will just point out for the edification of the board, as you can imagine, for those who don't know it, during the days of the storm, really starting Tuesday in the middle of the storm and running really for the most part through the weekend, pretty much all the days that most people were out of power, and then a couple, the Emergency Operations Center was up and running, coordinating all the different efforts in town, and the fire departments and Public Works and Erica, a lot of people were just out all day and sometimes all night. I don't know what the numbers are for the fire departments. A lot of the calls were not necessarily, there were a lot of emergency calls. There were also a lot of calls that were essentially service calls or a continuation of calls. So I don't know what the numbers are. And a lot of the staffing hours were volunteer. So I don't know what the totals are, but there was a lot of work effort put out on behalf of trying to keep the town safe and trying to assess the damage by all these different groups. Fortunately, with a lot of it being volunteer, the cost is not extreme, but just so everyone knows, there was a lot of work going on by a lot of different people. I know just in the Thursday and Friday I was involved, I put in, I think it was around 12 or 13 hours between the Thursday and Friday, for which you will pay me nothing.
Except counting. You know, our Human Services Department too. So, you know, Jenny,
Good point. Yes.
yeah, you know, really
Right. Setting up.
stepped up. We don't have a current CERT team, so there's no funds for that, where we might see funds into a CERT team if we can get them back up and running. But in absence of that, you know, Jenny answered the call. And so, you know, she worked a lot of extra hours. She's a salaried employee. So while there may not be dollars attached to it, there certainly is appreciation and wish that we could compensate in a different way, but it doesn't always work that way. But she really rallied to get us a lot of volunteers. So there are a lot of volunteer hours, and that's accounted for when we send in our numbers for FEMA. They ask for the number of volunteer hours that we had as well. So you might see us come back to you asking for funding for CERT.
Right.
Mike, I just wanted to add to your thing that it was so appreciated, you know, because all these volunteer firefighters and different people are going out logging, literally logging where the trees are down and everything else. And then you guys, and then reporting that in, and then Patch comes out with a pretty good comprehensive list of road closings in our town that, I don't know, from my perspective, really helped me know which routes to take and all kinds of things. So it was you know, it was a safety issue, but it was also, you know, keeping people still doing what they need to do with enough information. So it was really great.
We shared the list as a whole so that folks could see what it was and where it was, because Eversource wasn't coming. So yeah,
I know, we had to think for ourselves.
Beyond frustrating. So trying to keep people apprised, and in instances, you know, hoping that we didn't miss anything in our continual runs around town, that, you know, folks, even if they told us 5 times the same road, you know, we'd rather that than not hear about something and not know about a road.
Right.
So.
Yeah, between Public Works and the fire departments, every single road in town was checked at least twice a day, if not more. So even if a road was completely closed, someone drove all the way out to where it was blocked, verified it, and then drove all the way around the other side and back into that same spot from the other end of the road, which some of our roads in Willington, that's a long way around the block.
Yeah.
Getting to one side of Potter School, the other is
Yes.
not an easy task.
Right.
That's in your neck of the woods, Lisa. You know what that's like.
Yeah. Okay. That's it for new business, unless anyone else has any comments or questions on that storm effects on the budget.
Mike, I had something I wanted to ask about that was really should have come up earlier. It's really more of a question, but just kind of the status of all the changes with town clerks and the elections. I just wondered if Erica could fill us in a little bit on that, because I just saw in your minutes that the assistant is notified that she's retiring.
She is.
Is-
So we
Is
have a,
that end of the year, or is that?
no, October, as of October 2nd.
Yikes.
Town clerk resigned and left us. So the search for that, we are in the middle of. It closes tomorrow. And so then we'll begin the interview process, and hopefully within the next 3 weeks or so, hiring a new town clerk. And then, yes, after much deliberation and soul searching, our assistant town clerk has decided to retire. But I will tell you, there's a possibility if we need to hire temporary staff, she might be a resource for us to utilize. Certainly someone that knows what's happening in there and will be available to us. So once we have a town clerk, we'll immediately start the process for hiring an assistant town clerk. So those are the only 2 openings we have. One is vacant and the other is at least filled until October 2nd. That's all we have for now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
For correspondence, you all have it in the various emails over the last couple of days where I forwarded everything to you. You have plenty to look through there. And so that will bring us back to present to speak again. So if anyone who has a video feed, which is probably just Peter L.
They can all see Mike, they're just not on camera.
Right, but I can't see them if they wave their hand. That's the point. So if Peter, since you're the only one who I could see, if you have anything for present to speak, wave your hand, and then I'm going to move on to the blank screens. All right. Mike D'Amato, can you offer the unmute option to everybody?
Yep.
All right. Anyone else who's listening who would like to speak and present to speak, please accept the invitation to unmute and call out your name. And okay. Seeing none. Good and welfare. We covered it already. Retiring assistant town clerk. Another town clerk left. In the what?
There's a food distribution tomorrow here at the town office building, and Jenny's on. I think it's not, is it 9 to 12 again, Jenny? I don't know if she'll unmute herself. I believe it's 10 to 12.
10 to 12, yes.
12. And then
10 to
there's
12.
a food drive on Monday.
Yes.
Okay.
So we're going to give it out and then replenish it.
And I will, as always, give my thanks to the board members and anyone from the public participating in the meeting. And looking forward to someday when we can meet in person again. You all put up with this platform. We're getting better at it, I guess. And that's it. So
I move to adjourn.
thank you. I didn't even have to invite you.
I
Can I
second.
get a second? Lisa? All right. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Good night, everybody, and thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Mike.